The year is 1944 and the end of World War II is coming close. Ever since the failed German offensive to capture Moscow from the Soviets, the Nazis have suffered defeat after defeat and are in a rapid retreat back towards German territory. By the end of January 1944, the Red Army had pushed the Germans back past the pre-war Polish border. It is here within Polish lands that the Soviet Army and the Polish resistance fighters worked together to defeat their Nazi occupiers. However, to the dismay of the Polish soldiers, as soon as the fighting ended, they found themselves being forcibly disarmed and in many cases arrested by their former Soviet allies. Therefore, it was decided by the Polish resistance that in order to revive an independent Poland and have a seat at the victors' table at the end of the war, the Polish must liberate themselves from Nazi rule. On the 1st of August 1944, with Soviet troops rapidly advancing towards the city, 20 to 50,000 members of the Polish Home Army rose up across the city, formally starting the Warsaw Uprising. The Polish troops faced a massive challenge to liberate the city. The vast majority of them lacked proper weapons, equipment and training. In addition, the Poles were also used to conducting sabotage and guerrilla warfare tactics, not prolonged engagements with the enemy, which is what they were facing in the city. Despite these hurdles, within the first few days of fighting, they were able to win many engagements, even capturing gas and electricity plants as well as some vital factories. It wasn't too long into the uprising that the Nazis began to bomb the resistance locations into rubble. With no anti-air weapons of their own, the Poles hoped that the Soviets would help defend the skies, but no such support was given and the Red Army remained stationary on the opposite side of the Vistula River. On August 4, 1944, the Germans carried out a set of massacres against Polish civilians which were ordered by Heinrich Himmler as reprisals for the uprising. This massacre, known as the Wola Massacre, was conducted by members of the SS who systematically went house to house, shooting everyone inside. Men, women, the elderly, and children were all gunned down in their own homes and their bodies burned. Estimates vary on the death toll, but some say as many as 100,000 people were executed. By the 5th of August, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, that concentration camp in the old Warsaw ghetto was liberated and over 300 Jewish prisoners were set free, with many joining in with the uprising. Eventually, German reinforcements arrived in the city, which included several tanks. To the absolute horror of the Poles, the Nazis had rounded up civilians, mainly women, and used them as human shields to protect their tanks. Eventually, a stalemate ensued between the Germans and Poles. It is important to note that a significant portion of the Home Army were actually children and teenagers. These youth were known as the Grave Ranks and were made up of mainly members of Polish Scouts groups. The men would be used as active frontline soldiers, whilst the women would be used as both frontline troops as well as combat medics and nurses, with the younger members of the group being used as messengers. After weeks of fighting, the Polish forces began to run low on all kinds of supplies, including food, water, ammo, and equipment. The resistance had also been pushed back to only a few blocks of territory. By September, the Polish Home Army was forced to surrender. By orders of Heinrich Himmler, the city was to be leveled to the ground and completely destroyed. By the end of the conflict, 85% of the entire city was destroyed by the Germans. The Polish troops were sent to POW camps and the entire population of Warsaw was expelled from the city, with many residents being sent to forced labour camps or concentration camps across the decaying Reich. The uprising formally ended on the 2nd of October 1944. The casualties are disputed to this day, but it can be said that for the Poles, over 15,000 were killed and over 5,000 were wounded, with an additional 15,000 being captured, whilst the Germans suffered anywhere from 2,000 to 17,000 casualties, with around 9,000 wounded. The Warsaw Uprising was the largest partisan operation conducted in Eastern Europe during World War II and remains to this day a source of immense national pride for the people of Poland.